Okay, so as I kind of mentioned previously, I'm going to show you how to do this in 3ds. Obviously, Blender is also another good piece of software to use, or Cinema 4D, Maya. There's loads of modeling applications out there that you can do this with. And what we're doing is a pretty standard practice. None of it is particularly exclusive to any Autodesk products. So the techniques you can be replicated pretty easily. So hopefully this isn't your first 3D modeling venture, but if it is, this is quite a standard layout, so these 4 windows, or viewports as we call them, and it gives us a way of observing objects in a 3 dimensions. So if I came over here, for example, and just made a box, we can see, from here, so this says top, so this is a top down, and we can see that, so this is it from the left, this is it from the front, and this one kind of, I'm just pressing if I press the mouse wheel in, I can kind of move that around, and if I hold Alt whilst I do this, I can rotate it, so I can kind of see what that looks like from all these different angles. And if I ever get completely lost, I can drag this around in the corner, or I can just reset it to something. But normally, Alt mouse wheel will do what you're after, or if you scroll in, it will give you a bit bigger view. So that's nice. And we've got a couple of things on in the viewport. I've got the viewport set up slightly differently, maybe from what you have. If you like to move these around, you can sort of do that. I've never really found a need for it, but you might want to. And you'll notice here there's lots of kind of words. So this left matches the left and top matches the top. So if you click on that, you can kind of change which position you want. And we also have wireframe. So you'll notice this one's different from the rest of them. So this says edge faces, edge faces, edge faces. And actually what they are is their default shading. So if I was to put wireframe on there, so that switches back to wireframe. And that's kind of handy sometimes because we make detailed shapes, and it's easier to see the lines. But I'm just going to change that back to default shading. And the edge faces is actually an option. If I turn it off on this one, you can notice that these are no longer highlighted. So we get to see the overall shape, but we don't get to see the internal mesh. So it's kind of handy sometimes, especially with a project like this, to be able to see the topology of our mesh. So that's kind of that. If you want to maximize any of these viewports in 3ds, if you just hold Alt and W, it makes that kind of full screen, gives us a bit more detail, and we can see what's going on. Just Alt W out again, so we can do that on all of them, but normally it's this one we use. And then if we wanted to play around with this, we can convert it to an editable poly. So we notice here that it's now editable, and we can, I'm just pressing W there to bring up move. So here we have like move and selection tools, rotation and scale, and this is shortcut W, and then actually rotation is E, and then scale is R. So they're kind of next to each other here, and they're also next to each other on your keyboard, so kind of easy to remember. And you'll notice that if we click on the axes and move this, we can see it moving in 2 of the other viewports, but not the other ones. So that's probably on the other side of here, but if we were to do it on here, we can see it move on the other 2. So it's going to give us an idea of what's happening on our shape. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to get rid of this because we don't need it for now. So I'm just going to go up here, I'm just going to right click on it and delete. Goodbye. So we're going to use planes to actually make these shapes. Now notice here I'm using meters, which is kind of a good scale for a person. People usually between about 1 and 2 meters. If that's not there, you can go to Customize and Unit Setup. So this lets us decide what measurement we're going to use for everything in our scene. So it doesn't really matter as long as it's consistent, but maybe if you're using millimeters and you're doing a normal height, that's quite a few millimeters, so it kind of makes the maths a bit harder, if I'm honest. So I'm just going to use meters. So I'm going to come here, and this is the menu that we use to make stuff. So add, we're going to add stuff into our scene, so that's why it kind of looks like an ad. And here we've got some geometry, we want to make something, and we kind of have these, we'll get onto these much later on. And what I want to do is I want a plane. So by default I can set some parameters. The only one I really want to mess with here is the segments. So that's the amount of kind of vertices that are inside the shape to break it up. And this is just going to be in the background, so we don't need any. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to left click and drag this out. So that's probably about right. I can look at here. So length and width. So width is the longer one, so that must be that way. And length is the shorter one, so that must be that way. So my person is probably somewhere between 1 and 2 meters. So let's say they're going to be about 2 meters tall. And let's go back here and it's kind of, we can have a look at this. That's probably about somewhere around a quarter. But if we're not sure, what we could do is we can go up here and we can actually go image, and we can go to image size, and this will pop up. And we can see here, so this is in millimeters, so this is a pretty small image. But we can see what the ratio is. You know, we could, if we wanted to, copy these. So this is 1.8, so let's just copy that. And put 1.8, and we don't need that. 1.8. And the other one is 58. We've actually got 57 already, so what I will do now is I'm just going to go over here and I'm going to click move, and we can kind of move this around. If we come down here, this is the position of it, and actually I just want to reset this, so I'm going to right click on this and make sure that it's in the middle. We can see that it's gone to the middle. And before I start moving things, I'm going to go up here, and it's already on because it's kind of a preference of mine, but try to make sure that this is on, so that when you rotate you'll notice that, so let's grab this one, you'll notice that some numbers come up in yellow, and I can now only rotate in 5-degree sections, but it gives me a much better idea of how much rotation is on there, so I don't end up with kind of like 89.9 degrees, and it will kind of throw me off a little bit. So I'm just going to stand that up like that, and here, so we know that this is like 1.8 high, so if that's in the middle, that's sort of 0.9, and this is Z, so this is Z, so if I put this to 0.9, it moves it up, so I don't want 0 to be halfway up the person, I want that to be at the bottom, so let's put one of those, and now I need to make a second one of these, so I'm just going to grab any of these toggles and I'm going to hold shift and drag it. You'll notice that a new one comes out, so that's going to be called plane 02, that's fine. And we have that, and I'm going to press E to rotate it, and I'm going to rotate it here, and I'm going to do 90 degrees, so I'm just looking for 90, there we go. And we could now use some maths to kind of figure out, well, what's half of this, and I'm going to move that back there, and then what's the difference here to there, or I could just do this. So I'm now looking in that viewport in the top left, and you'll notice that it's lining up probably about there. And then I'm going to grab this one, and I can see kind of in that top right, I can see as they overlap, so let's put that about there. That should give me kind of roughly what I want. So I'm just going to Alt W that and I've got a little gap, but that's fine. So now what we need to do is we need to bring in the materials. So you can do that by going up here and clicking Material Editor, or you can just press M in 3ds and that will bring up this. So you notice that I've already done a little bit, so let's just start on a new one. And what we want to do is we want to apply a texture, and textures replace the diffuse color. So the diffuse color is kind of like the base color. You'll notice that this looks gray, and this is gray. If we were to click on it, we would get a color wheel, and if we were to change that, you can see that the color here is kind of changing. So, but we don't really want a color, we want our picture on it. So let's just put that down here. So we're going to click here, and you'll notice that this comes up, it says none, because this is how we add a map to our material. So we're going to click on there and it's going to say, okay, what do you want? And we want to add a bitmap. Okay, so it doesn't really matter what format we've saved our image, it doesn't have to be BMP. Bitmap is just a generic reference for an image, so like an image file. When you click on there, it's going to give you a few things. You can see I've got some previous little bits. I'm going to go to desktop, and I've got front and side. So let's put front on first, and you'll notice that that comes up here. So that's in kind of number 3, and we're going to do the same here. We're going to come to here, we're going to open a bitmap. I'm just double clicking on that, and we're going to go to desktop and side. So luckily I called it something sensible, and that gives us side. Now what we can do is we can just click, so this one was front, and I'm going to drag it over here, and this one is probably going to be front, and this one is probably going to be side. And you'll notice that when you drag them in, they don't actually show up. We've just got the grey, we haven't got the texture. That's because by default in 3ds it doesn't actually show the texture in the viewport, and that's to save kind of processing time and power, but we want to be able to see it because it's a reference image. So if you come down here, and this button here, it says show shaded material in viewport. So if I click on that, that's going to come up. If I click on that, that's going to come up. So we've got a couple of problems right away if I zoom in here. So one of the issues is that it kind of looks to me from here that that's rotated. So that's not good at all, obviously. But it does look like it's rotated by 90 degrees. I can kind of make out some arms and some podgy legs there. So let's click on this one. So that was the first one we did. And you can go ahead and call this like front if you want, and side, so we know which one we're dealing with. And here there's a lot of different properties for this. If we tile, we can change kind of where the center is, we can change the tile, how many times it goes around, and we can change the UV angles of our map. So if it's 90, it's probably going to be one of these. That kind of didn't look great, so let's put that back to 0. And let's try this one. 90 or minus 90, is it? No. Very odd. Let's try this one. There we go. So UVW, so we've kind of moved that around. Sometimes you just need to tinker with these. Sometimes you'll notice that maybe it's offset slightly, so we can kind of change these if it's not quite right, and you'll notice that if you keep going it's just going to keep repeating in some kind of weird conveyor belt of dummies. And I'm just going to right click on there to reset it, because that looks pretty good to me. So we're going to go to the next one, and we don't actually have to have it selected because we're just playing with the material. And let's see if it's rotated in the same place. So that's a kind of a good guess, that's an educated guess that it's probably going to be the same thing. So this is pretty much the start of how to get this done. There's a couple more things that we just need to look at, but just before we get started, but that's a good start right there. Right, so we've set up these starting textures for our blueprints, and the next thing to do, you would think, would be to get a model in there and start going. But we just need to do one last thing to make sure that this kind of stays where we want it to when we're modeling. If you can imagine, we could just throw a box in here, and we could easily kind of be moving this around and then grab this and move this, and that would not be great, right? That would kind of screw up what we've just been doing. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab both of these, so just hold Control to add to your selection, or if you press Alt, then you can kind of take selections away, just to kind of, and you can go over here and you can see that they're both selected. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to freeze them, so I'm just going to click on this little icicle here, and they're both frozen. So I now can't select them, I can't move them, and that means that when I'm making my model later, I won't accidentally grab a bit of them, move the blueprint and misalign it with my model. Sometimes with more complex models you could easily do that and not actually notice for a while, so you'd lose kind of a lot of work when you finally realize that then it's not going to match up. But one thing you'll notice is that when we do this, especially in 3ds, we lose the image. And that's just because of a simple kind of setup issue. So we're just going to go over here, we're just going to click on either one of them, we'll need to do both, and right click, and we're going to come down to properties for this object. And amongst all of this, you don't need to worry about any of this. You'll notice here that it says show frozen in grey, and that means that when we freeze objects, it grays them out. And the reason for that is that Autodesk assume that if we've frozen something, we don't really want to see it at the moment, and to kind of, if you have really complex scenes when you're modeling, it can kind of slow down the viewport. So by freezing things and not showing all of the detail on them, it kind of helps speed things up. But we're only making a small model, so it's not going to be a problem. So if we click here and we click show frozen in grey, and we untick that and click OK, you'll notice that it comes back, and we just need to go to number 2 as well and go here, and it's still there, so click on that and it comes back. And I'm actually gonna whilst I'm here, I'm gonna right click and rename these. So this is side, I can tell because it's got the blue like selection highlighted on it, so and this one, right click, rename, is the front. So now they're frozen and we can see them, and I can click here and I can't move them. They're visible in the viewports. If I Alt W, you'll notice that they're visible in any viewport where I can have them visible. Now this one we actually can't see because it's kind of the back here. Now that's because the material isn't two-sided, so this is kind of the normals side, and this is the flipped, so it won't reflect it. That's not a huge problem, we only want to do this anyway. So what I would probably do for this is actually change this, so this is on front at the moment. I could kind of move this and figure out which way I want, and so that says back. If I click back, then that kind of gives me a much better idea. This is, we can't see it on this, but this is the top, so it's kind of obvious why we can't see that, because we're just looking down on the tops of these two. We can just about see them there, so there's no picture. If we put a ground in, or when we start making our model, we'll see that from that angle, but it's really these two that we want to focus on the most, and this one obviously. So this is going to be more about kind of, you know, what our model looks like, and these two are hopefully going to keep us in line. So what we want to do once you've done that is you most definitely want to save your file. So let's just check that on the desktop for now. Humanoid. And that's a pretty good setup, but I will maybe, if I'm feeling generous, put this on Moodle for you as well as sort of a start, but do definitely try to do that yourself as a good practice. So have a quick break, and we will come back in the next video on how to start modeling for your humanoid.